All right, well, we'll get started. This should be kind of short and sweet, unlike some of our other talks. But and I also say this too. This is a very tricky subject to teach on because when we're talking about parasites, it's not a extremely black and white process. Like, you know, as a chiropractor, I deal in the world where I can take an X-ray on a patient and I can literally point to where the problem is, and even to mostly untrained eyes, saying as a patient, like you guys can see where the problems are as well. The thing with parasites that are tricky is, first of all, you all have them, all right, to some degree. Just like you all have E. coli, streptococcus, right? Trillions and trillions of viruses inside of your body. They're a part of our ecosystem is, I guess, the best way of saying it. If you've been around on planet Earth long enough, like you have them. I'm going to talk about the most common places where the really problematic ones come from here in a minute. But really, when we're talking about you having parasites and it causing a problem for you, we're talking about a process meaning that they're out of balance in your body, okay? So just like you can have, I mean, you all have strep in your body right now, you all have E. coli, they only ever become a problem where you have symptoms related to it is when they go out of balance, okay? So it's like a dysbiosis or whatever. So in this case, we're going to be talking about parasites and sort of building a case to see if you yourself might need to address these, okay, is I guess the best way of putting it. And I'll talk about how we do that, how we know that you might have them, likely have them, and it's, like I said, it's kind of tricky. So my story, this is the only gross picture I have on there, which maybe it's not even that gross. I thought about putting some real nasty ones in there for shock and awe, but I'm like, we'll deal with that later maybe, right? But for me, so I found out, just a quick kind of backstory on my health, you know, I sort of tongue-in-cheek, you know, considered myself to be the healthiest person that I know anyways. And so when I did routine lab work on myself about 3.5 years ago, I found out that my thyroid was out of balance, and which was interesting because I didn't really have any symptoms related to it. I didn't have like the classic sluggish or bad metabolism or thinning hair, brittle nail, like a lot of people that have when they have hypothyroidism. So I ran a really in-depth thyroid panel and found out that I had Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune version of a hypothyroidism, which was also really surprising because I'm like, well, what the heck, how do I have this autoimmune condition? So when I found out I had that, and it was largely asymptomatic, thankfully, I mean, like it's 100% asymptomatic, but it was kind of a blessing because I'm like, all right, well, now I can be proactive on this and make sure, because I don't want it to become symptomatic. Now, another side, kind of like part of this is that when I found out that I had this, of course, it made me sort of rethink a lot of the things that I was doing for my health, and which I've been doing for a very long time. And so, because I was like, well, clearly, if I have an autoimmune condition, then there's some things that I'm missing or doing too much or not enough or whatever. Like, it was just a kind of a place to sort of start with a blank slate and get some questions answered. So, or I guess just say start asking different questions and trying to find the answers. So that really led me into really thinking a lot about what I believe about nutrition, and a lot of you guys have come to some of those talks that I've done in the past, and understanding light and frequency, grounding, all these other things. Like a lot of these things were not new, but I might have underestimated their importance of what they are in our lives, right? So most of the things that I kind of investigated were not brand new concepts for me, but I looked at things in a different way, I guess is the best way of putting it. Now, in doing some further advanced testing, I found out that I had some infection related to Lyme disease in the Bartonella family. So one of the things that we'll talk about is that a lot of these biotoxins, Lyme, mold, parasites, right, tend to all affect our bodies in very similar ways, and they sort of co-infect with each other. They kind of are there together. And so I started doing very specific herbs and very specific protocols to deal with the Lyme in my body. And without really knowing, a lot of them also are anti-parasitic. So how did I know that I had parasites? As well, one day, which I can't remember even the last time I did this, but it was almost like intuition, I guess. I happened to just look down at a bowel movement, and there was a ton of them in there. And I was, of course, shocked because I didn't think that I had any. And in fact, I'd done really extensive medical testing, or not medical, functional medicine testing that would possibly show if I had parasites before, and I'd show that I had 0. So that's why it kind of came as a shock to me, because I'm like, well, what the heck? A, I didn't know I had any symptoms related to parasites, because I don't really have any symptoms at all. And then when I saw them come out, I was like, well, what the heck? I tested a stool test, and I did a 3-day, and I did all the $500 GI tests, out of pocket, and it didn't show that I had any parasites. So I was like, okay. And then, but yeah, here I was looking at them in the toilet, right? So this is, it's a fun little Saturday afternoon, when this happens here. But as probably all fun things in life, and not that I'm the first, by any means, even an expert on parasites, but it was kind of like, who was the guy where the apple fall on his head in the tree, right? And then all of a sudden he was inventing new laws of physics, right? The name is blanking me right now. Newton, thank you. Yeah, Newton, right? So it's like things happen, and then it's like that opens up your world, and you start asking right questions, and then it kind of leads you down this track. So I've been really consuming absolutely as much as I can about parasites and biotoxins, because I really had a lot more experience in mold particularly. I consider myself a minor expert in that. More so in Lyme, although that's really tricky, and then I'm kind of a aspiring expert, or more so, I guess, more like an advanced novice at this point in terms of parasites. So that's kind of how I got on this journey, because I can't tell you how many patients over the years who came to me that were dead set that they had parasites, and I ran the functional medicine stool test, the 3-day samples to see, and they always came back negative. So it's not that I didn't believe in that parasites exist. I mean, I learned about them in microbiology, but I really didn't put as much weight to them, because for me, again, going back to the chiropractic thing, it's like I could point at an x-ray, I could, see the problem, or I could look at a lab test, right, and I could see that there was a problem. Person had diabetes, they had this or that or whatever. But this is, and part of the challenge is they're not very tangible, unless it seems like, based on what you're experiencing, they could be a culprit, or again, you actually see them come out of you when you start killing them. So it makes it tricky. Now, here are some common places where they come from us, and this is kind of like living in a first world country, if you will. Eating sushi or consuming, raw fish, raw meat, that can definitely be a source of that. 1 out of 12, and this is from the CDC, even 1 out of 12 public pools in the country have been tested and found to have parasites in them. So, that could be at any point in your life. You could have been swimming in a public pool, whether it was at a hotel or just your neighborhood pool, right? And getting them. Doesn't mean you don't go swimming in it. If you want to, doesn't mean you can't do that. I'm just saying, this is where you might have gotten them. Pets are a big one. That's one of my dogs right there in the picture. I definitely, especially if they sleep in your bed, right, or you give them kisses on your mouth, right? I mean, some things that I've done. We love our little pups, right? Certainly traveling to third world countries, whether it be for a mission trip or a vacation. Not to say every single time you do that you're going to get exposed, but those are possible sources for that. Number one source, though, by far is from in utero. So meaning if your mother had them in utero, in the womb, they are very easily passed down that way. So meaning, yes, even babies can have them. And then the other one is spouses also too. So this is where it can be, or you might, in your case, you might just be married to a parasite, not getting them from them. I don't know. I'm just kidding. That was a mean joke. But this is where it can be tricky, right? Where it's they might have it, and then it's you might be, even if you don't know you're doing things to help your body be not a good environment for them, it can be a little bit of transmission back and forth a little bit through that. So again, these are some of the most common ones. Are there umpteen more, ways to get it? Absolutely. Chewing fingernails, chronic fingernail chewers can do that, because you just think about things you might be touching and putting in your mouth, right? All those things too, which I did have a really bad problem with that when I was a little kid. I still do it a little bit too, and I'm nervous. So it's just these things happen. And then again, remember, we're talking about here, exposure is not the problem, because I could be sick and sneeze over every single one of you here in the office right now, and only 1 or 2 of you might wake up sick a week from now. So it's about your specific body, and is it to use a specific, a breeding ground, or a really fertile ground for these things to be able to thrive in, or, because our body are going to kill these things all the time, just like it's killing bacteria and viruses and even cancer cells all day long. So again, it's not just about the source. It could, because you might have only been exposed potentially one time in your entire life, but your body at that point was at a weakened state, or it was a easy, fertile ground for those things to sort of, thrive in an environment, and therefore they've just allowed to be grown in perpetuity through that. So here's some common characteristics that just how these things affect your body, how parasites affect your body. So they really characteristically create an imbalance in your immune system, specifically in your T helper cells. So quick little summary, you have a Th1 and you have Th2, T helper cell 1, 2. They're different parts of your immune system. The Th1, and I'm super summarizing this, is more like your long-term immunity. So for example, if you get chickenpox, right, as a kid, it's like you develop a long-term immune response to that, versus Th2 is more of an emergency response for that. So when people have like allergies, for example, that is an overdominance of Th2. And so one of the things that parasites create is they ramp up your immune system, because your immune system is recognizing them, so it's ramping up the emergency part of your immune system, trying to help you deal with them, which is why allergies are a big, common, like I'll say yellow to maybe even red flag for people that have parasites. Now, again, as we go through symptoms, just a quick caveat, it doesn't mean that every single person that has allergies has parasites, right? Or every kid that wets the bed at night or grinds their teeth has parasites. We have to kind of look at, and this is why I'm going to give you just guys a bunch of data for yourselves to sort of decide, is this something that you think you should pursue further with or not? That's kind of the whole point here, is it's sort of like, it's like evidence, but you're the jury for yourself to decide, yeah, I need to do something about this, or like, maybe I'm good. So Th2, they will create biofilm inside of your body, which you can kind of think of that like a sludge, and it's like a protective sludge to protect themselves. Okay, and they really have a common link with metals in your body too. So specifically, iron is a big one, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But also things like mercury and lead too. They kind of almost hide behind those types of metals. Like I said, they harbor toxins like Lyme and mold, right? Because they're alive, so they have characteristics. They can carry those things too. They can really there's a junction between your small and your large intestine that has a valve there called your ileocecal valve, and they like to hang out in there, and so they can cause disruption there, which can really lead to a lot of diarrhea, as an example. The smaller parasites in general tend to cause diarrhea, and the larger ones tend to cause constipation. So smaller might mean they're microscopic, okay? To like, you would only really know, you'd only would see them if you were like really looking at them. To larger ones, they literally come out looking like worms, like they are worms, right? So they come out like, not like earthworms, but like they're very, like that's a worm, right? And I've personally had both that I know of. So they really can affect the gallbladder. So particularly if someone has both issues with constipation and diarrhea, like you have struggles with like both ends of the spectrum, not just one, that's usually your gallbladder, that's the issue, and they can literally be inside your gallbladder. So we have to push them out with things like TUDCA, bile salts, and the like. Another big characteristic they do is they increase ammonia levels in the body, which is a byproduct of waste in your liver. Okay, and that can cause problems if those levels rise in your body. They can cause things like headaches and migraines, seizures. Even they have a big neurological impact on that, and they make detoxification very difficult too. And if you think about it, one of the reasons what these things do is they really have a survival mechanism. They have survival mechanisms that impair your body's ability to detoxify on its own. Well, why is it? Because if you detox them, they die, right? And so they have these survival mechanisms that have been around and evolved as long as human beings have been around, right? To sort of coexist and live in the space that they do. And there's other animals as well, like our pets, right, and other animals. So they have these survival mechanisms that affect our body, which then creates the symptoms. And so they do that for their survival purposes. So we have to kind of outthink them, outsmart them, and in many ways kind of outwork them. They literally affect your brain, specifically through the brain-gut axis. So everybody has heard of the brain-gut axis before? Yes? It's okay if you haven't. So it's the connection between, like, there's literally a very strong connection between your brain and your gut. Okay, so for example, and we've known about this for a long time, but Harvard really finally kind of like investigated it. But it's like if you've ever been nervous, where do you feel it? You don't feel it here, you feel it here, right? Or if you've ever been stressed out, like really stressed out, it's like, what do? You don't want to eat, right? So like it's that connection there. So there's a very strong like direct neurological link between your brain and the nerves in your intestines. So it has a kind of a feedback loop. So it's a two-way street. So it's why you can, whenever you say there's a problem in the brain, there's usually a problem in the gut, and vice versa. And so one of these things they do is they affect your neurotransmitters, which most of those are produced in your gut, like serotonin. You've at least, don't worry about getting too technical, but you've heard of serotonin before, right? There's another one called GABA, dopamine, melatonin. So they affect those, and they love to eat iron. So when people have chronic anemia, so like meaning like no matter how much iron you take, no matter how much red meat you consume, like if your ferritin, your hemoglobin, right, all these things continually come back on the low end, especially despite doing those things. Now, first off, right, if you have like low ferritin, low hemoglobin, and you're not eating red meat, well, that's the first way to address that and get that up. But if you're doing all the things, but you still can't see those numbers coming up, I mean, assuming you don't have an internal bleed going on, like that would, for me as a clinician, scream at that there's probably parasites need to at least be looked at for you and addressed in some way, shape, or form. So that's like a really you can start, that's like a gold star one right there. I can't read my own notes because oh yeah, so they have a strong life cycle too that coincides quite strongly with the full moon. So I had a patient who, she worked at a memory care facility. So these are people like Alzheimer's and dementia. And I remember just randomly, she told me this one time, this is like 7 years ago, and she told me, she's like, oh, I'm like, oh, why are you so stressed? And she's like, oh, it was a full moon over the weekend. And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking about all these like kooky, like whatever, I don't know, vampires and werewolves or whatever. And she's like, no, like we have to bring in more staff on those times around it because the residents, they go nuts now, right? And now again, these are people that don't consciously know that there's a full moon, right? So they're just physically reacting, right? And I didn't think of anything other than I thought it was kind of just kooky and spooky, right? And kind of like fun in a way, like not fun for them, but just like fun to think about that. But what happens is that our bodies have, a rhythm related to it too. And so when there's a full moon, we produce more serotonin and less melatonin. So, and I didn't actually really know that until I started looking at this, but that's why a lot of people sometimes don't sleep as well around a full moon, because you're not producing as much of that melatonin. But parasites will have a strong affinity. They have a lot of receptors for serotonin. It's kind of like energizes them, so to speak. And so they're way more active around that. So that's kind of another like just characteristic to pay attention to, is that if you notice maybe in the 3, 4, 5 days around the full moon, plus or minus on both sides, like you just cyclically feel worse. And I don't know how to quantify that for you other than like, yeah, I feel worse. Sometimes you can't really know that until you start thinking back, or you can, start paying attention to when is the full moon every month. You might never think about it, right? And you can see like, oh yeah, like, am I more tired? Are my sinuses worse? Do I have worse digestive problems around that? Now, if you don't, it doesn't mean that you for sure don't have parasites, but it's just kind of like something for you to pay attention to, okay, on that. So those are a couple of like clinical pearls, right? The iron thing, the worse around the full moon thing, symptoms related to, Th2 dominance, which we'll go over some of those more specifically here in a second. So here's some common ones for kids. And interestingly enough, like I've definitely seen a explosion in a lot of these symptoms in kids over the past 5 or 10 years. Now, I don't think that that means we're all of a sudden getting in contact with more parasites, but I do think that it's a terrain problem, meaning that as kids get more unhealthy, right, they are more of a breeding ground for these things that normal exposure they could handle, but they're just being kind of overrun with these. And this is not the only thing as parasites. There's all kinds of other things there. But teeth grinding in kids, big kind of like red flag for parasites. We sort of classically think as people who grind their teeth as what? Like exactly. So like, should the average 4 or 5-year-old really have that much stress in their life that they should be, like not really. Unless of course there's some type of emotional trauma or abuse or whatever. But kids, like normal kids have these problems a lot. Bedwetting is another big one. And the reason for that is it disrupts the Th2 in the body, the electrical system. Think about it like when your body is like amped up and stressed out. Like whenever I ran track, or before I have to like speak in a big seminar, I got to pee like 6 times like in an hour beforehand because my body's kind of getting ramped up for that. So you think about it, you have this 4 or 5-year-old who's otherwise potty trained. Like why would they be wetting the bed all the time? It's because their body is like ramping up in the middle of the night and they can't control it because it's just like you can't hold it back that long. So it's not like, usually it's not if it's a behavioral thing, that's one thing, but if it's a physiological thing, then I'm thinking about parasites now. Definitely skin issues, so hives, eczema, right? Again, there are other causes for that. If the kid's diet is absolute garbage and junk, like I have to start there first. But now I'm getting a lot of parents coming in that they're like, yeah, like we cut out the gluten, we cut out most of the dairy, we aren't doing like all the junk snacks like we've tried to do Whole Foods, and they still have these raging skin issues. Well, clearly there's something else going on with that. Itchy butts, nose, or like, especially anus and genitals, okay? And this might sound kind of funny, but like when you start talking to parents, or if you have kids, grandkids, like you realize like a lot more kids like actually have these issues there. Dark circles under the eyes is another big sign there. Why? Because that's a kind of a classic sign of being anemic, low iron, right? So you're not getting enough oxygen. So they get that like almost like, feeling like they're at altitude or looking like they've been up, in Denver for a week. Major emotional outbursts, like unprovoked or very lightly provoked. And then seizures are another big one too. So again, can kids have any or all of these issues without having parasitic problem? Yes, right? So, but these are like a lot of the common ones where if the low-hanging fruit things are not addressing these problems, like this is where my brain starts going, down the list there. Okay, so for adults, a lot of the same kind of things, but because our bodies are obviously different, they can affect us in different ways. So we got digestive problems, like diarrhea, constipation, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. How many have heard of SIBO before? Yeah, a few of you. It just means that the bacteria of your gut, which should be mostly concentrated in your large intestine, like your colon, it can start, if the conditions become unfavorable, they literally start growing up into your small intestine. So people with SIBO tend to have a lot of stomach pain, gas problems, because it's just those extra fermentation that's going on among other ones there. But usually with the SIBO, it's that the same conditions that make SIBO favorable are the same conditions that make parasitic thriving, if you will, to be favorable too. Headaches and migraines, especially if there's parasites that are affecting the liver. The liver is a big organ. I know, again, this is like thinking about like, okay, if we've been clearing your spine, you're going to a chiropractor, but you still have really consistent, persistent headaches. And again, you're drinking water, you're getting electrolytes, you're getting B vitamins, right? But you still get really consistent headaches and migraines, parasites. Can't gain weight, can't lose weight. Believe it or not, it could be either one of those. Allergies, big one. So, yeah, I mean, it's just that's a big one. There are other things that can cause that, but allergies can be a really, especially if they ramp up at nighttime, because parasites become more active at nighttime. So it's like if you notice your sinus gets way worse, and I'm not talking like waking up in the middle of the night per se. I'm talking like it's like 9, 10 o'clock, and you're like winding down, and all of a sudden you start getting really congested, you're like a lot of that makes me think parasites, if the timing of that especially. Your sleep is off. Again, obviously a bunch of things can cause that, but that goes underneath the changing of your neurotransmitters, like GABA specifically, and you increase ammonia. If you get like a sudden onset of food allergies, so if you could, I don't know, drink or eat cheese your whole life, and then all of a sudden you realize that cheese is affecting you out of nowhere, well, clearly something in your body changed, right? Because it's not like the cheese, well, I mean, I guess if the cheese could change, but if it hasn't, if that variable is constant, then they can cause that too. Like I said, the anemia, skin issues in adults, right? And then even seizures in adults there too. So there are other things, you know, those are kind of the most common ones for that. So we can come back and we can answer some questions here at the end, but I want to kind of get through this here. So testing, very difficult. From a medical perspective, I would say it's almost impossible unless they just happen to be a nerd about it. But I'm saying like conventional medical testing, you're just barking up the wrong tree, you know, with this stuff. I mean, unless you have such an obvious parasitic infection or recent exposure, if they start burrowing, I know it sounds weird, but if they start getting into your organs, like meaning like they're not just hanging out in your colon, they're not going to really come out until you start killing them and getting them out of there. So stool testing, even miss a ton. Like I said, there's one test called the GI map. It costs $500. It's the gold standard of functional medicine gut testing, including looking at bacteria, viruses, parasites. It literally maps out like the exact breakdown of the bacteria and viruses that you have in your body, and are they in balance or are they out of balance, right? But they look for parasites too. I've done that test twice, okay, and they came back as negative for parasites 2 times. So it doesn't mean it's a bad test. I just don't trust it anymore, at least from terms of like I can't rule out somebody not having parasites just because a stool test comes back negative. And in the medical world, they will typically do stool tests as well. And so again, if they're hanging out in your colon, it might show up in that. But if they're hanging out in your gallbladder, your liver, your brain, or other organs, even your muscles, like you're not just gonna be pooping them out to be found in a stool test. Now, couple of sort of classic, you know, not wholly conducive or wholly specific to parasites only, would be pinholes in your nails. So if you look at your nail bed and it looks like somebody took a pin and they just started kind of pressing in there and you have like little pinhole size indentations in your nails, that can be a sign of them. If the white part under your eye, right, so below your iris, like if I look up, you can see the white under there. If you see very, the technical term would be tortuous, or like very like thick, like really dense squiggly lines on the lower part of your sclera, the white part there, that correlates with your GI system. So there's a study called iridology, and these are practitioners that have studied associations and this stuff for thousands of years, and all because your eye is connected directly to your brain through the optic nerve, and your brain, of course, controls every single organ and cell inside of your body. The eye can be a map to the health of your organs. So there's other ways to look at this, but I look at it as a tool and nothing else. I know the inner part of your eyes there is thyroid, especially in endocrine related. Lower part of your eyes is GI related. So if we see really thick squiggly lines like blood vessels there, that can be a sign of parasites in your GI system. Now on a blood test, and this would be a blood test, if you get lab work done every year, you can go and you can look these numbers up and they will be on there, okay? So the first one, and it might be a different order, but you see eosinophils, or it might be abbreviated as EOS, okay? You would see a number if parasites are very likely, again, not for sure, but likely, that number would be above 3. So you might see 3, 3.2, might be 4, might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? If it's a 2, good chance you don't have them, can't say for sure. The second one is monocytes. And these are white blood cells, I should say. So if you get a CBC, which almost everybody here, I'm sure, gets that every year done in their annual physical with their doctor, they're running this because this is standard. So I guarantee you've gotten this done before. If you don't, you should fire your doctor because this is like 101. All right, it's high. Let's bet higher than 101 even. Monocytes above 5. So if I see eosinophils above 3 and monocytes above 5, I'm having a strong conversation with this patient about doing a parasite cleanse or, addressing that, because I'd be very, very confident that they would have them. Again, if they're chronically anemic, despite doing all the things, if they're pounding iron supplements, pounding iron infusions, pounding red meat, right, and they still can't get their iron up, I'm looking at parasites, and then, like I said, the full moon. So I would say there's no gold standard. I guess that's the summary of this. There is no gold standard test to effectively rule in or rule out if you have these. So how then do you know if you have them? I think there's only 2 ways. Number 1, if you see them come out of you, then you know you have them, right? Or at least you had them, right? That might be it, but you at least have them at that point. Or you work on them and you feel better. Like your symptoms improve in doing an herbal cleanse of some kind, and we'll go over what they are, what the herbs to take for them are. So again, with me being asymptomatic, doing testing, all those things. Even in my case, I did not have the blood tests there that showed up as having like those white blood cells higher than they should. Now, in looking, I did maybe arguably have the squiggly, like a high enough density on the part under my eyes. Anyway, so it's like I said, I kind of struggle to sometimes teach this a little bit because as a chiropractor, I'm normally like, here's your spine, there's your problem. There's no argument at that point. It's literally black and white, right? This is not black and white. It's very gray. So the most susceptible people, beyond having, like I can also say up here, just poor health, right? Like being in a breeding ground. But there's 2 things I would say specifically. Interestingly enough, type A blood types, for whatever reason, can be more susceptible to them. Part of it is that type A blood types tend to have slightly lower stomach acid than other blood types. And if you think about it, your stomach acid for things you consume and ingest is really your number 1 defense mechanism for foreign things coming inside of you. It's a very high pH, or at least it should be, and it kills those things. But the issue is that chronic stress will actually lead to a condition called hypochlorhydria, and that's just a fancy way of saying low stomach acid or lower stomach acid than you should have. So either not, usually just means not enough. Which is a common cause of heartburn, actually. So heartburn people typically have low stomach acid, which I know it sounds oxymoron or counterintuitive, but that's how it works. So when we talk about seeing more kids, having these issues, right? And just because they're just like the easiest ones, because they're not as consciously aware of what they're doing. So like I kind of look at them a little bit more as like there's like less placebo effect of certain things. We got to think about the chronic stress that's going to come from their food, right? For many of them being, masked for 3 years in their highly formative years. Non-native EMFs, like all the electro pollution that didn't exist 10 years ago, certainly didn't exist 30 years ago, right? They're bathed in this stuff all day long. You want to see a hyperactive child do better, turn off the Wi-Fi at night and watch how much better they sleep. Right? These things are it's crazy how they affect all of us. More dyes, right? They're not getting enough nutrients. So like they're just more susceptible to these things, right? So chronic stress lowers stomach acid, which as an adult, like this affects us all of us, to a certain degree for that. So that's why I'm a big fan of like doing, this just side note for anybody, like doing apple cider vinegar before I eat, right? Because that primes your stomach acid to start producing enough and more of it. It just helps you break your food down better, so like makes your job easier. Digestive enzymes are also great if you want to take it up a notch, right? But even something as simple as like digestive bitters too is a really like you could call it like an old world way of doing this. Like many cultures would have consumed very strong tasting herbs and sucked on them before they ate because it just, for whatever they figured out or they intuitively know, that it helped to strengthen their digestive system to make it stronger. So in really looking at a lot of cultures and areas of the world where parasites are a very, very, very common problem, like life-threatening, ones, most of these cultures have developed or learned either by just passing down or trial and error, have learned anti-parasitic habits to help them, have as good a chance as possible of not, dying from some of these things, like in Africa and certain rivers, right, and all these, things there. We don't have to worry about it to that degree, but we also have way more chronic stress than most of those populations do too. So it kind of, tit for tat a little bit on that. Okay, so I went write this down. I'll tell you which ones to write down here because I just want to kind of go through this just more so for awareness. This one you can write down, Morinda. Morinda is really considered just a very broad spectrum, kind of gentle one. What many people that are experts in like the parasite world is like, this is the one that they recommend having with you, like if you're going to be traveling abroad. So like this is like a preventative one that you would take. Like if you're like, going to, I don't know, maybe a mission trip in Mexico or whatever, and you're like, yeah, I might possibly be exposed to some water or some foods I wouldn't normally do. Who knows what they're washing your produce like that you eat with, right? This would be just, you're going to be swimming in the pool, whatever. This would be the one that you would kind of take prophylactively, right, to just make sure that if you do get exposed to some, your body is going to be more than likely able to kill it very quickly. I mentioned the digestive bitters already, just to help with your stomach acid. Black walnut or wormwood, also known as artemisia, those are kind of like the two, I would say, classic ones, like ones that have been well known for a long time for people in this world. They're the ones I usually make sure kids are getting, especially too, because they're really easy to get in liquid form. So it's easy to give them to kids, and they're going to comply in taking them. Not all of them can be in liquid form. That's like stable or work. There's Melia. There's Mimosa pudicans. I will say that is to the best of my ability, when I started taking Mimosa pudicans, it was within a week or so of when I did that is when I saw my parasites come out for whatever reason. So I don't know. But Mimosa, because I tried to give it to my daughter, so it comes in capsule form. And so I broke it open and I was going to try to mix it in like some kombucha or to something like liquid that I knew she wouldn't really taste it. But the stuff turned to like quick drying cement. It was really fascinating. And so like it was just not like not to the hardness, but like it was like so gummy and like, and it kind of like made sense then if you think about like on what it would do on the inside, is that it's like gonna like stick and grab, if you will, right? That stuff, like that's what it like looked like, something you would see like in, like one of the 1980s Ghostbuster movies, like Slimer or something. It was really crazy. So needless to say, I was not able to get her to drink it, and I wouldn't have drank it either because it was gross, but I take it in capsule form. Olive leaf, I would say that's a writer downer. Olive leaf is just amazing for all kinds of things, viruses, bacteria, and anti-parasitic. So a lot of people that have parasites also have chronic viral infections. Why? Because the immune system has been overtaxed in working on trying to suppress or keep these parasites at bay. So then viruses can be more firmly entrenched in your body too. So like Epstein-Barr virus is a common one. H. pylori, right? Which you don't really know these things for sure if you test it, but you'd be surprised. It's like 60 to 70 to even 80% of people have chronic viral loads on their body, and your body's just working like crazy to keep it down. So if you're tired all the time, that's usually a virus, problem. Kind of reverse engineering that too. Chronic viral load could also make your body more susceptible, like not able to deal with the parasites as well. So it's this whole ecosystem inside of our body, right? If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, the ones we use are rosemary and scutellaria, just because those are known to be 100% safe. I mean, really, black walnut and wormwood are too, but we know that there's no issues at all with those. One note on taking herbs is that if you have like all of a sudden like really loose or runny stool, a lot of times that can mean you're either taking the wrong one or maybe too strong of a dose. So a lot of this is trial and error for sure, and I'll show you what I think is the best way to eliminate the guesswork out of this as much as possible here in a second. So yeah, so just again as a side note, so how would you do this? Well, I would say if you're like, well, I just want to dip my toes in this a little bit, I would make sure I'm getting black walnut and wormwood in there, and probably olive leaf would be the three that I would start with. And there's other things too, like clove and lysosomes and all that. But in kids, I would have them doing the black walnut and wormwood. Okay. So let me just go over the two on the right real quick. The ones on the right are for pediatric because they're in liquid form, right? So we got the Happy, which this have like black walnut, wormwood in there. Then there's a microbe slayer up there, which has a few other things there. So that would be that's how we would comprehensively target a kid, okay, safely, because you have to do it by weight, by dose, and all that. Adults, we can usually throw the kitchen sink at it a little bit harder. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you're just going to feel a little rough, or maybe have some, symptom changes temporarily. I would say a baseline product is this one right here called GI Remove, and I have the label up there so you can kind of see some of the things that are in there. There's the artemisinin. I don't know if my mouse will. No, it won't work. If you look at this, the regenerative organic GI removable botanical blend, you got oregano, very good at killing bacteria. Black walnut, thyme, clove, which are also very good at killing bacteria. So this is not a parasite-specific product, but it's to get rid of pathogens in the gut, like bacteria, viruses, or parasites as well. And they got a bunch of other things on there as well. So this would be like, I would say a starter, like very gentle, safe. You're not going to disrupt your world too strongly by taking this one here, versus doing more of a hardcore parasitic detox like that I'm doing right now. I mean, I've had some days. I never couldn't get out of bed or whatever, but like I've had some days where like by the end of the day I was like feeling pretty rough, like more tired than normal, and I'm never tired until I go to bed. So like I felt that I've had disrupted digestion and stuff, and again I've obviously seen parasites coming out of that. So the comprehensive, like I'll call it the like Mac Daddy, if you will, biotoxin protocol is produced by Cellcore. This is actually formulated by a friend of mine. His wife almost died of Lyme disease about 15, 16 years ago. Thankfully, she's alive. He saved her life. He had to quit practice and sell his practice to spend full time trying to get her well. That's how bad it was. It was like eating a hole through her heart. And he figured out that it was Lyme. Believe it or not, this Lyme is also tricky to test, and it wasn't really well known like 15 years ago as it is now. And even still, most medical doctors are clueless about it, especially. But anyway, so he had to pull together like 15 to 20 different supplement companies to sort of like source all the things that he did research to find to kill it. And then he got her better, and then he sat back. Again, remember like the whole, what was it? Not Aristotle, Galileo? No. Newton, thank you. See? So silly. I just read the book called The Greatest Minds of All Time, and it talked about all those guys in there. So that's why my brain is like all over the place on that. But he's like, well, this is silly. Like, this is way too complicated for the average person to put together. I'm just going to do it. So he did it, and smart man. He's got a great company now, for that. So, but what they do is they break it down kind of by phases. So first of all, there's like a prep phase. So like it gets your body, the drainage path, the detox pathways opened. And then it takes you systematically through a process that, I mean, you can't guarantee that anything and everything is going to be gone by the end of it, but it's specifically targeting all the like Lyme, mold, and parasites comprehensively to know that you're throwing a good bit at them, if that makes sense. Okay, so like it's a very targeted protocol for those things. There's a foundational protocol which is like 6 months long, 4 to 6 months long, and there's a comprehensive protocol, which is like 6 to 8 months long. So, well, which one do I choose? Well, I mean, if you're going to do this, well, you kind of base that off if you're like, wow, I had almost all of those simple symptoms on there, or the majority of them. It's like, I would just say, go straight to the comprehensive. If you're like, yeah, I have just a couple of them, but they affect my life pretty strongly, like I would probably do more of the foundational. And you don't have to make the decision on your own. If you're like, I'm not really sure if I need that, or just start with something simple, like I'd be more than happy to talk with you about it. Again, I can't prove to you one way or the other if you have them or not, but we can sort of like have an intelligent conversation about, is this something that's worth investing, the time and the resources into. So, like I said, it takes the thinking out of it. It's like just boom, you just throw the kitchen sink at it and kill them all. It is about $300 to $400 a month on average. Now, because you can kind of see, and I don't have them all on here, there are certain months where like you're taking more things, so like those months would be higher, right? Because you're like it's just the package price of those things broken down individually. I know like the foundational protocol ends up being around like $1,500 or so when all is said and done for it, and the comprehensive is about $2,000, for that. Now, there are ways to get some discounts on that. I did this talk at my other office last week. I can get bulk ordering discounts, so I wanted to wait for this one here. So if you have an interest in doing that, again, not that we're just going to order, but we'll talk. We can just do a quick phone call first and talk about it. And if I get enough people, I can get 5%. If I get even more people, I can get 10% off of that too. So it just depends how many people are going to do it, because I can order all the kits at one time for the first month and so on and so forth and go. That's not an upfront cost. It would just be like you would just pay for each phase as it would come along there. Okay, so like I said, how long, how often? Until symptoms improve or they stop coming out. I have one girl who lived in Asia for like 3 years. She has been passing 20 to 40 worms a day for about a month. So, and they still keep coming out. So she's like, how long do I need to keep doing this? Well, let's start with when you go a week without seeing any. Then we can see if you're at where you need to be at. The average, I can't remember if it's a pinworm or a roundworm, will lay 200,000 eggs every single day. Now, thankfully, your body kills probably 99.99999999999% of those, but you can see how if your body is weakened, these things can get prevalent real quick in there. And remember, that's one thing, but you have hundreds of trillions of viruses inside of you. You have 70 trillion bacterial cells. I mean, you literally have more bacteria and virus than you do human inside of you. So it's not like, this is not that crazy, but it's crazy to think about it a little bit. It's not like you have like millions of worms running around you. Because remember, unless you're like dying and your body's infested with these things, like you're killing the overwhelming, like almost all of them, right? But it only takes a few to really cause disruption, in there. Okay, so just some basic action steps. If you're thinking like you just have an interest in doing Cellcore, I mean, I didn't go through it all that much tonight because I'm like, if you're not interested in it, like don't want to do it right now, I'm not going to berate you guys with the details. Be like, yeah, I might need to do that. Let me talk more about it. We'll pop on the phone and do that. If you just want to dip your toes in it, like I said, GI remove would be a great way to do that. Or you can self-order any of the things that I had on there, like start with black walnut, artemisia, right? They're easy to get. You can order those things, online anywhere. And if you're like, well, I don't want to do Cellcore, but can you kind of guide me and yeah, but I'll have to charge for my time for that too, because it's not just like some cookie. There's not a cookie cutter plan here, if you will, right? This is like, it would be customized, and I would do the best of my ability for that. So those are that. Questions?
Question. Oh, go ahead.
I'm here for both. It's good.
If you have worms, say, in your liver,
Yep.
organs, and you do some of these detoxification
Yep.
things, are they in turn going to go through your digestive system and come out?
Correct.
Okay.
They ultimately get pushed out and dumped into the gut, and they come out that way. Okay. They can come out the nose too, actually.
Cool.
If they're in the brain.
Honey, can I look at your nose?
Which is very rare, but if they're in the brain, that's tend to be where they come out. Like you'd blow your nose and you would see. It's not like they're wiggling. You guys get that? Like they don't come out alive. They come out dead.
We were fostering
Yeah.
a dog, and I picked up the product, and I'm like, we didn't give her rice last night. And I'm looking at it, and it starts moving. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yep. I mean, usually in humans they come out dead. Unless it was like recent exposure or whatever, like usually they come out dead. So they're not going to be moving and wiggling around and waving at you. But theoretically they could, right? And so that is brings up a good point, is like if you have pets, it's probably good to, the other thing is like, well, let's say you get rid of them, then like what should I do about it? Like maintenance is like kind of the general rule of thumb would be at least consider it every seasonal change to maybe a week or two of taking some of these things just to make sure that that's like the prime time. Like think about it. When do people get ill the most consistently? When it goes from fall to winter, when it goes from winter to spring, when it goes from spring to summer, you get the summer cold, right? And it's like those transition points. There's a lot of factors for that, not just things like this. Light changing, season changes, behavioral changes, right? But like our body does use seasonal changes to do internal changes as well. So it's kind of trying to take advantage of that. If you have pets, it'd probably be a good idea, like in that you're really, I'll say, kind of intimate with them, if like close contact, sleeping in the bed especially, like snuggling, kissing in the mouth, like all that stuff. You'd probably want to consider doing some of and they make herbal cleanses, not just meds, but like herbal cleanses for parasites as well, that you'd probably be smart to at least give to them maybe a couple times a year, like which we're going to do that in our pets too. I just haven't had time to really investigate thoroughly what I want to use yet for that. So the answer is yes. What was your question?
There's been a lot of studies come out on ivermectin using as a parasitic.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that it has been shown to be effective with that. Personally, I would just opt more for herbs over a medication, even though I know ivermectin is very safe. That's just my almost philosophical, more standing point, if you will, believe. But certainly, I mean, ivermectin has been used as an antiparasitic for, I don't know, what is it, 80 years or something like that? Yeah, a long time. Yeah, a long time. Longer, than I've been on the planet Earth. So that's definitely something you could consider to do for that, for sure. The big thing is that with this, and this is what Cellcore takes the thinking out of it, is if they're stuck in organs other than just your gut, there's certain things that you have to, like gallbladder, for example, like TUDCA. TUDCA pushes the bile and stuff out of your gallbladder, so like it's like they can be a little entrenched, and so it's sometimes tough to get stubborn ones out of there. So I'm not sure what kind of mechanisms ivermectin has on those things, but certainly that would be in the family of things to take for it, for sure. Yep. Any other questions? I think if I missed anything. So in summary, your spouse is a parasite. All symptoms are parasites, right? No. So I guess I would say in summary, this is something I think to just have in your Rolodex of information, right? You now know some of like the classic signs that you don't have to be the doctor for somebody, but if like it comes up at work and you're like, gosh, like I'm always anemic. It's like, well, have you ever thought about parasites? Well, no. It's like, well, you should look into that, right? Like you can at least be kind of helpful for other people too, at least kind of pointing them in a direction based on this too. So good. Well, I'll hang around for a few minutes if you guys have like a private question after that. Otherwise, you're free to go and rock and roll. Have a Merry Christmas. All right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.